do do do. Josh Review. Yeah. Hello everyone, welcome to another album review with me, Joshua Smith, and today we're going to be looking at the album Smiley Smile by the Beach Boys. This is actually a 2-disc special with Smiley Smile and Wild Honey, but we're going to be looking at Smiley Smile today. It was released September 18th of 1967. Some chart information about it: it peaked number 41 on the US Billboard 200 albums chart. It was released on the labels Brother and Capitol, and the only single from this album is Heroes and Villains. So without further ado, let's get this started. Basically, when this album first came out, it was meant to be something even greater than what it turned out to be, and what it turned out to be was something that was generally looked down upon when it first came out, or better yet, people looked at it with faces like these. Why? Well, Smiley Smile was actually supposed to be something called Smile, and that was supposed to be the follow-up to the legendary album Pet Sounds. Unfortunately, because of so many different difficulties, Smile was ultimately canned, and the Beach Boys had to chuck something out quickly, and they created Smiley Smile. I'm not going to go over the whole story with Smile right now, because that's a whole different story for another different video. In accordance to Smile and Pet Sounds before it, Smiley Smile was partially meant to be a musical statement by the brains and leader of the Beach Boys, Brian Wilson, along with his lyrical collaborator for the project, Van Dyke Parks. It's been widely documented that during this period of time, Brian especially was dropping a lot of acid and many other psychedelic drugs, and that in part is what gave birth to these projects. He wanted to convey what he was feeling and hearing in his mind and heart, but unfortunately for a group that was built upon singing songs about cars, girls, and surfing, it seemed incredibly radical, and to many people, including lead singer Mike Love as well as their record company Capitol, they just weren't on board with the project. Enough backstory though, let's actually jump into this music. Interestingly enough, a lot of the music off this album are remnants of Smile. Some were changed either drastically or hardly at all. In fact, some are just completely copied and pasted onto this album from Smile. It's not that hard to figure out since the word Smile is in the title of this album. It's a psychedelic sonic experiment. A lot of the tracks in there feel very barren of sound, and it's mainly attributed to how after Smile's failure, Brian and the gang retreated to his home studio, and the recording equipment was very minimal, and that really shows and reflects through the album. The production is incredibly lo-fi minimalistic, and that actually adds a bit of intrigue. Vegetables, With Me Tonight, and Getting Hungry especially display that aesthetic. There really is no theme or cohesive elements on this album like there were sorta kinda supposed to be on Smile, but in all honesty, there really isn't supposed to be. It's less of a lyrical or musical theme, and more of a production theme. Again, the album is super lo-fi minus a couple of tracks, but this album feels more like Smile leftovers with a couple of new tracks. When this album came out, the only saving graces that kept it from being an absolute failure were probably Good Vibrations and Heroes and Villains, so let's talk about those. I'm sure most of you have heard Good Vibrations at least once in your life. Good Vibrations, like many other tracks, was a leftover from Smile, so people had already heard it, and it was already a huge hit. But Smiley Smile kind of gave people the same song within the context of an album. Unfortunately, the album really doesn't have any context to be spoken of, but anyways, Good Vibrations is psychedelic surf rock heaven. The sweet-esque aesthetic of it, the feel-good lyrics, the extremely complex production and instrumentation, as well as its can't-be-missed electro-theremin soaring throughout the track. And as for Heroes and Villains, another leftover, of course, it shows off a different side of the Beach Boys in which there are elements of comedy and historical overtones with talk of Indian girls, settlers, and so on. In actuality, this is one of the main focal points of the original Smile album, where it was supposed to display elements of Americana and early American settlement and civilization. It's funny, it's quirky, it has several different parts to it that keep the entire song feeling fresh, always bringing out something new with each section. As for the other leftovers, we have Vegetables, or Vegetables, which features Paul McCartney, and get this, he's eating lettuce. That's right, the main percussion for this track is chomping on and eating lettuce, while the main actual instrument is the bass guitar. During this period, Brian was all about health, thinking that living a healthy life would lead to spiritual enlightenment, which is funny, because not long after this album was released, and through most of the 70s, he really let himself go. The original version of this track was quite different musically. It had many more instruments involved and felt fuller, which is pretty much how every Smile leftover can be described on this album. Fall Breaks and Back to Winter, or the Woody Woodpecker Symphony, has bits and pieces left over from the musical suite from Smile called The Elements. Very similar to Vivaldi's The Four Seasons, each of the four classical elements, earth, wind, fire, and air, were supposed to be personified through 4 different songs. This particular song, Fall Breaks, contains parts from the element fire, or Mrs. O'Leary's Cow. It's perhaps the most far-out and psychedelic track on the album. It's an instrumental like how Fire was, and is incredibly avant-garde. The reason it's called the Woody Woodpecker Symphony is because of the light harmonica being played that sounds very similar to Woody's iconic laugh. The other leftovers are wind chimes, another part of the elemental suite, air, and wonderful. Both have been changed quite drastically, as wind chimes used to sound very happy, calm, and smooth, but in this version it's very dark, sinister, and quite scary, despite the incredibly light vocals that are practically whispers. And Wonderful has several changed lyrics, but the most striking thing about it is that it's been slowed down, same with wind chimes. The basis of Wonderful is that it talks about a young girl who's shown to be innocent until she meets a boy who changes all of that, and it's presumed that they make love, and the girl is stripped of all of her innocence. She thought it was love, but she realizes it was anything but. Apparently it was one of the favorites by the Beach Boys during this time. Everything else, like Goin' Bald, Little Pad, With Me Tonight, and so on, are totally original tracks especially made for this album. Regardless, for a lot of people who diligently followed the Beach Boys, they're only reminded of what could have been because of the leftovers, and it kind of left a bad taste in their mouths. I'm not going to lie, Goin' Bald and Little Pad are probably my two favorite tracks in this album. Goin' Bald, like Heroes and Villains, adds elements of comedy while still being totally psychedelic and super trippy. Goin' Bald itself is sort of a suite, actually. It has the opening part that's actually a remnant of the song that was scrapped from Smile called He Gives Speeches. While the middle section experiments with voice modulation, making it sound really weird and creepy, but the third part is more of a classic rock section with pounding piano and guitar, but take that with a grain of salt. And Little Pad is just a really chill track that almost makes you feel like you're in Hawaii, as the song talks about longing to have a little pad or a house by the sea in Hawaii. Wouldn't we all? Overall, this album is kind of one of those either really love it or really hate it kind of albums. While it was a total flop back in 1967, it's actually become quite a cult classic among Beach Boys fans. At the time, it was all people had when they wanted to hear the actual Smile, but fans did eventually get Smile in two forms, both in Brian Wilson's own solo release in 2004, where he and his band basically redid all the music, and in 2011, we were given the Smile Sessions, which had all the original unfinished versions of the songs from 1967, as well as tons of outtakes. But this incarnation is truly a classic Beach Boys album that really puts everything they were trying to do on display. It shows where Brian's head was at the time, for better or worse. It's true that he was troubled and his musical vision was radical for a lot of people, but this album in some way was like a closure for not being able to finish Smile. I really do like this album a lot, but I can't say the same for everyone else. It's very, very far out, and if you're only going to listen to it just to hear good vibrations, I recommend just picking up the single or listening to it on the internet. The album itself is an artistic statement and should be treated as such. If you're deep into psychedelia, experimental music, avant-garde music, lo-fi, or minimalistic music, then this album is right up your alley. Anyways, thank you for joining me on this another album review. If you want an album or song to be reviewed that you like or may recommend, just leave a comment down below and I'll get to it as soon as I possibly can. But once again, thank you for watching, and so long.